Hans and Stefan were both experienced cave divers who traveled from Germany to explore the famous Sac Actun cave system in Tulum, Mexico. With Hans having completed over 150 dives and Stefan more than 50, they felt confident in their abilities. At ages 47 and 37, they were fit and healthy, ready for the adventure ahead. They had planned to explore the Cenote Quimba and the underground tunnel system, excited to document their journey on video. Little did they know, their exploration would take an unexpected and fatal turn due to a single, crucial decision they would make during the dive. Before we dive into video, please subscribe our channel. As always, viewer discretion is advised. After 28 minutes of diving, Hans and Stefan made the decision to drop their backup air tanks, known as staging bottles, believing they had already covered a significant portion of the dive. They assumed they were far enough into the cave to continue without needing extra air supplies for the remainder of their journey. However, they were mistaken. In reality, they had only just begun their journey through the cave system, and their progress had been slowed significantly by their constant filming. The videography distracted them, causing them to lose track of time and air consumption. As experienced divers, they should have known the importance of ensuring enough air for both the outward and return journey. Unfortunately, by the time they dropped their tanks, they were still in the early sections of the Cenote Quimba and had used up a significant amount of their air supply. This early misstep would come back to haunt them, setting the stage for the dangerous and ultimately fatal choices they would make later in the dive. As experienced cave divers, Hans and Stefan knew the importance of navigating safely through the labyrinthine system. To ensure they didn't get lost, they placed jump lines and cookies along their path. A jump line connects two different sections of the cave, allowing divers to know which way they're going, and cookies are small plastic clips used to mark the direction and identity of divers. These markers are essential in ensuring that divers stay on track, especially in such complex and tight environments. By placing their own jump lines and cookies, Hans and Stefan ensured they would be able to find their way back to the exit. Despite these precautions, however, the distractions from filming and their underestimation of air usage meant they still missed vital signs of depletion in their air supply. The use of these markers provided a sense of security, but the diversion from the main goal, monitoring air levels, would lead to a critical error in judgment later on. After 75 minutes of diving, Hans and Stefan noticed their air supply was depleting faster than expected. They realized that they had used more air than they should have, especially considering their plan to follow the rule of thirds, using 1/3 of their air on the outward journey, 1/3 on the return, and reserving 1/3 for emergencies. However, the time spent filming and their slow progress through the tight sections of the cave had caused them to use up more air than anticipated. By the time they turned around to head back, they had passed the point where they should have started conserving more air. This realization, though alarming, came too late. Despite their best efforts to remain calm, they were now in a situation where their air supply was dangerously low, and they had no choice but to make critical decisions on which path to take for their exit, knowing that their dwindling air could threaten their survival. With their air supply running low, Hans and Stefan were faced with a crucial decision. They could either swim against the current through the tight and difficult sections of the cave, or choose the easier route, which led to the Grand Cenote exit, where the current would help them move faster. Stefan wrote a note in the water, asking if they should head to Grand Cenote, and Hans quickly replied with no. The divers decided to stick with their plan and continue swimming against the current, hoping it would be the faster way out, despite the physical challenge. However, as their air continued to deplete, this decision became increasingly risky. They were hoping to reach the Paso de Aro main line, which would lead them closer to the exit, but the longer they swam, the more their air was consumed. This decision would ultimately prove to be a critical misstep, as their energy and air were running out faster than expected, putting them in an even more dangerous situation. As Hans and Stefan continued their dive, the situation grew more desperate. Stefan's air supply was nearly exhausted, and he began to panic. To conserve air, Hans deployed his spare regulator hose so Stefan could share air from his remaining tank. Both divers were now struggling to maintain a steady pace, but their energy was running low and their breathing became heavier. The tension was palpable as they moved quickly, trying to make their way back to the Paso de Aro main line. However, the more they swam, the faster their air was depleting. By the time they reached the tight restrictions leading toward the exit, Stefan's tank was completely empty, and Hans was left watching helplessly as Stefan swam ahead using the last bit of air. The once steady and cautious dive had turned into a frantic race for survival. Hans, now unable to breathe from his own tank, could only watch as Stefan made a final, desperate attempt to reach the surface. In the final moments of the dive, Hans realized the severity of their situation. His air supply was completely gone, and he was stuck in the narrow tunnel, unable to move forward. Stefan, still desperate to escape, pushed ahead, using the last bit of air in his tank. Hans, in a state of shock, watched as Stefan swam towards the exit, only about 60 feet away from the surface. However, Stefan's body was already exhausted, and he couldn't reach the surface in time. Hans knew that if he didn't find air soon, he wouldn't make it either. The horrifying realization settled in. Their careful planning had been undone by a series of critical mistakes, and now there was no way out. Both divers were trapped in the cave, with no air and no way to save themselves. The once hopeful dive had turned into a deadly struggle for survival, and Hans could only watch as his chances of escape slipped away. After Hans and Stefan failed to return to the surface, the other dive teams noticed something was wrong. They had not appeared at the Cenote Simba exit, so the next group went to the Grand Cenote to check if they had emerged there. After notifying the dive shop, the rescue teams were quickly mobilized. As they retraced the men's path, they found Hans's body near the Paso de Aro line, his tanks empty and his mask removed. A flashlight was lying on the floor nearby, marking the spot where he had succumbed to the lack of air. Moving further, they found Stefan's body just 60 feet from the surface, near the exit, but still underwater. His tanks were also completely empty. The investigation, using video footage, dive computers, and notes, revealed the cause of death: gas mismanagement. They had used too much air during the dive, and their decision to push ahead with depleted tanks led to their tragic end. Their deaths underscored the importance of careful air management and planning. The tragic deaths of Hans and Stefan highlight the critical importance of proper dive planning and air management. Their failure to follow the rule of thirds, which ensures divers reserve enough air for the return journey and emergencies, ultimately cost them their lives. Despite their extensive experience, their distraction with filming and underestimation of air consumption led to a fatal decision. The key lesson is to always prioritize safety over exploration, especially in challenging environments like underwater caves. Divers must stay vigilant about air levels and make cautious decisions, even when faced with excitement or time pressure.